Whenever someone talks to me about horror, I end up going back to Junji Ito and my favorite works from him. Because despite loving horror like how I love spicy food, I just don't watch horror these days because few things kick me with genuine horror and discomfort past momentary things like jump scares or like knowing once the characters leave the area of the threat they will be completely okay isn't that scary after all. It's like the ghost is bound by some sort of invisible wall from one of your video games, you know what I mean? The most important thing is the haunting effect of good horror that would stick with me afterwards, even long after I watch or read the thing. It's gonna loom in the back of my mind and fuck me when I'm trying to sleep or close my eyes. The closest thing that has gotten to that was SCP stuff. Oh well, that was before I found Junji Ito, but when I first found SCP stuff, it was a goldmine for me. It opened my eyes to a whole new creative side of horror that's just past the whole stupid dumbfuck teenagers got lost in an abandoned house shit. But back in 2014 or something, I found Junji Ito's Hellstar Remina, and it hit me like no other horror story I read ever did. Because it's creative. It's not the typical demon and ghost that you're used to. It's a threat so out of the box that it hits you with a sense of fear because you don't know what it does. It's something Lovecraftian, something eldritch, Cthulhu vibes, you know? The unfathomable. It still has a lasting effect on me today, you know? And how I think about horror in general, like what could be out there. If you don't know, Hellstar Remina is about a living planet from another dimension that ends up finding Earth while eating everything in its way to play with it with its dick-sucking lips. And we get to watch society break down because it looks horrifying. Like it has a giant eyeball, and that's how it finds Earth, just through direct eye contact. And it scares the shit out of me because, you know the gaze detection system? Which is basically the feeling you get when you know something's watching you. But imagine if that something was a star-sized planet and it starts moving towards you at unnatural velocity. You know, like some predator in the wild. Or at your playground. But this is something far beyond running away from, or calling the police, or hiding, or stopping. Just by sheer difference in means of existence. You don't even belong in the same playing field as that thing. And that's what horrifies me the most, because it's inevitable. That planet was alive, well, and the planet was just racing towards Earth, destroying everything in its way effortlessly. And the planet looks ridiculous. Alright? It's not scary alone. If someone showed that to me, I wouldn't be scared because it looks like it has dick-sucking lips. But it's the same thing as the Titans from Attack on Titan, which in another YouTube comment section I've actually talked about being uncanny and terrifying because they're so goofy in design, but contrasted by their brutal ways of attacking you, it defies your expectations and makes things unpredictable, therefore really scary. I love Hellstar Remina, but another one I love is Uzumaki. Uzumaki is a story about a town that gets consumed by a spiral curse in like the most literal, figurative, any kind of sense. Remember when I said how I was so sick of the generic haunted house type of horror? Where you're isolated from help and that's your biggest problem? With Uzumaki, the town had a few thousand people in it. Everybody had lives and history and their own jobs, and they have daily commute. And when the curse started to up its antics and get worse, everybody was in the shit together. It started out with a guy who was really obsessed with the spiral shape, revolving his entire life around it to the point where he doesn't even work anymore, just going around collecting stuff that has a spiral shape at the expense of his family. And then he succumbed to his fetish and mutilated himself into a spiral, and that was graphic as hell. Then his wife got PTSD from the whole thing after seeing that, obviously, and then ended up being haunted by the spiral as well. Then she got hospitalized. You know, she cut off her own fingertips because somehow her fingertips had a resemblance to spirals, even though I don't see it on mine. But it got to a point where she found out that this part of the ear has a spiral shape, and she stabbed her own ears out, putting herself into an eternal state of vertigo, wrapped up in bandages until the day she inevitably dies, and that's horrible. But that's not even the beginning of it. Well, it's like the tip of the dick. Okay, the amount the curse affects the town just escalates over time. People start losing, like some of them start losing their humanity and turning into snails. You know, the lighthouse of the town started to shoot out some weird, unnatural light that when people stare at it too long, it makes them walk in circles for eternity. Again, it doesn't sound terrifying. Neither does it make sense. But It's the way the characters in Junji Ito's stories react to these stupid things. He makes up the stupidest threats ever. But the people react somewhat, you know, naturally, like they have the same opinions that we would have. Not always. I'm missing a lot, by the way. Smoke forms spirals in the clouds. Mosquitoes turn pregnant women into insane blood-hungry murderers whose babies are born with the ability to speak and they want to go back to the womb. Then the babies have weird growths that people get addicted to eating. It's some weird-ass shit. The real horror began when like 6 hurricanes hit the town one after another, destroying every bit of infrastructure that it had. The hurricane was a spiral itself, so it was sentient, and it called out names and targeted specific people to fuck with and buildings to destroy. Eventually, it isolated the town completely because of how bad it messed things up. It destroyed most buildings, except the old row houses, which would later be made into this abomination. It's so sad to see the town turn into this, after knowing what it once was. You couldn't escape either, because the town was coastal and surrounded by mountains. So leaving by sea would get you sucked into a whirlpool. Attempting to use anything airborne would cause twisters to form, and hiking through the mountains would make time go slower for you, while you get disorientated and lost, only to wind up at the other end of town again. Going by the roads through the mountains as well would mean that they tangle and twist into an infinite abyss that you fall into and there's no escape. So that was a horrifying concept on its own. People can come in, but no one can get out. My favorite part was when the entire Coast Guard fleet showed up. Like, for rescue, obviously, because before the town was cut off by the hurricane, everyone knew that the hurricane was coming. It was still connected to the outside world. But as soon as the entire Coast Guard fleet turned up with giant ships full of hundreds of people, all of a sudden, like, you feel a sense of hope, of victory. Like, finally, outside people saw. You see, with typical horror, whenever, you know, our stupid dumbass characters are trapped somewhere they shouldn't be, you know that when they get out, or when you know, like if the US Army came in and started guns blazing and whatnot, the ghost would fuck off. you feel that way. But here, even the entire fleet showing up, it ended up being consumed by a suddenly forming whirlpool. Like humongous in radius, sucking everything up, swallowing it all. There were probably thousands of seamen on those ships. And that doesn't, like, the curse doesn't give a shit. Okay? And, you know, long story short, the curse always wins and triumphs whatever you try to do to escape it. It's inevitable. Like, it's Thanos. And, you know, the curse wins. As for Hellstar Remina, it was about seeing humanity break down in the face of inevitable destruction. Of all we know and love, human history and everything. And it ends with everyone dying, of course, because it's a Junji Ito story, but part of me was also so enraptured with how uncensored it was. Like how the planet at times looked goofy as shit, but then when it reaches Earth, it pulls out its Australia-sized tongue and starts licking it. It almost looked funny, right? But like I said, it's the reaction. It's how everything else reacts to the threat itself, which looks ridiculous on its own. But everything in Junji Ito's story reacts so realistically, it becomes uncanny. Like when it drags its tongue across Earth like it's a cherry or something, you can see the ground being tore up completely in humongous stretches of dead land. And it completely, like, it spun the Earth, you know, throwing off the wind speeds and creating like super fast winds that demolished everything. It dragged itself across cities. You know, now to my point. I love Junji Ito stories because after seeing so many typical spooky haunted house stuff, where the threat is bound to an isolated area, like the threat has a limit. Junji Ito's horror breaks all expectations to give us something new and fresh that doesn't need to hide from the eyes of the public. It's not a ghost that disappears when, you know, your mommy looks at it. You know, I hate it when in the movie, like, oh not in the movie, in movies when a child would see a demon or something that it's actually clearly there, and then they're like, Mom, Dad, you know, there's a monster under my bed, or there's a molester under my bed, and like, go to sleep, honey, but Mom, look, and then he would show the damage the ghost did or something, and the parents would be so fucking dumb and still say, go back to sleep before I ground you for a month or something. But it's always it must be my imagination, or it must be your imagination, it must be a nightmare. I fucking hate that. Junji Ito makes really interesting Threat Toys horror stories. Like, these aren't typical demon and ghost designs. These are really goofy, and these are things that when I was a kid and we had long car rides, I look out the window and imagine. I know I was fucked up, but in theory, it's ridiculous. But you know, like stuff he makes up. Kids turning into snails, planets that have dick-sucking lips, walking fish that fart and make people fat. But it's because it's almost comical that it's so uncanny. And that kind of subverts expectations. Like, it defies all expectations. And therefore is kind of deceiving to the eye. Which adds some element of unfamiliarity. And that makes things so much damn scarier. Junji Ito could somehow make a rubber duck terrifying. You know, but he isn't afraid to explore so many different ways of horror. You know, he extracts horror from everything. He can make a toaster scary. You know, there was this one story which I'm not gonna tap on because the video's long enough already. But he made hiding under blankets horrifying. He made blankets fucking terrifying. Deadass. But thank you for listening to me rant on. I just thought it was a very interesting topic to talk about because I got reminded of horror. And if you like it, feel free to tell me. And if you don't like it, feel free to tell me why. And subscribe if you want to for absolutely no reason. I plan to play more games, don't worry about that. I actually want to record Phantasy Star Online New Genesis when that comes out because it's an MMO and I love MMOs because I can look sexy and I can socialize with people. But it's closed beta, I gotta follow some rules. Update on that. I can't play closed beta New Genesis because Sega's like, no offensive material, and I'm like, fuck, I'm all offensive, so. See ya. I hope you have a good one.